Welcome to Accept Your Gifts, the 22-minute podcast for inspiring your most creative life. My name is Tracy Crow. I'm an author, writing coach, and Marine Corps veteran. I'm looking forward to co-creating today's show with you. So if you're ready, are you ready? I'm ready. So if you're ready to live a more creative, more magical life, let's get started. My special guest today is Meredith Brown. Meredith is a Marine Corps veteran who also has 30 years of corporate experience in the industries of oil and gas, transportation, and banking. But you see, Meredith is also a novelist. That's right. And I first met Meredith about a year ago in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I was hosting one of my women veterans writing workshops. So in this past almost year, Meredith and I have been working together with a handful of other women as she makes progress on her second novel. And soon after I launched this podcast, Meredith suggested an episode about bringing creativity into the workplace. What a great idea! We tend to think of creativity as being stifled in most workplace environments, and that we have to reserve all that creative flow of ourselves and our spirits outside the 9-to-5 place. Meredith has got great ideas for us, and I'm so excited for all of us to learn what she's learned about how to bridge this gap between creativity and work.
Hi, Meredith. Thank you so much for joining us today on Accept Your Gifts.
Hey, Tracy. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Well, listen, I really want to thank you for actually suggesting today's topic, workplace creativity. You know, we tend to think of creativity in somewhat limited terms, like all those fun activities or hobbies that we do outside of work, like writing and gardening and painting and dancing and singing and all those fun creative things. So when you first suggested this topic about workplace creativity, I was really intrigued because, of course, I'm thinking of everyone I know who feels stuck every day, 8 to 9 hours a day, in jobs or positions that don't seem to feed their creative spirits. So I think you're about to suggest that we can shift all of that with a shift in perception. Is that right?
Well, it worked for me. Beginning in about 3 years ago, I was that person working in corporate America for about 3 years who was just like, oh my God, I'm only using half of my brain. Like, this is terrible. But then about 3 years ago, I started writing my first novel, which has been published. And that's when I began to realize that, well, actually, I can take some of these creative ideas or the techniques I use to be creative in writing my novel and bringing them into the workplace. Not that I'm going to stand there and say, okay, let's dissect this sentence and see if it makes sense with our activity plan, but just the own techniques you use in order to write your novel or paint your picture. Because, in fact, creativity is really it's about a perspective, right? It's a perspective. And so why do we shut off the perspective that comes naturally to us in order to conform in a corporate environment or a work environment, when in fact, that same environment needs that creativity as well?
Right. Yeah, it does. But I mean, I think we get into those little cubicles and we think that we're showing up every day and we're just punching these clocks, or we're just, doing these various tasks that we're assigned to do. And I think some of us are kind of afraid to step out and express our creative selves. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think there's some truth in that. I think there's a lot of truth in that. And when I started taking these creative techniques from I use what we call mind maps or timelines for my novel writing. And when I thought about bringing them into work, I began to wonder, why do I feel like I can do this? And it reminded me of a commanding officer that I had when I was on active duty in the Marine Corps. And his whole thing was, I don't care how crazy your ideas are. it helps us to address the problem set, then bring them on. I mean, whatever it takes for you to be creative so that we can address these issues and figure out the best way to accomplish our mission, then I'm all about it. And let me tell you, Marines come up with some really crazy, yeah, I mean, not, you were a Marine, you know, not borderline ideas, but like flat out, you know, the general, he's a general now, but at the time he was a colonel, he'd be like, that is illegal. Well, yeah, I know, sir, but if we back it up to the point where it's not illegal, maybe we have something. And then he'd be like, all right, well, tell me more. But he gave us that safe environment, that safe atmosphere to put out those really out far afield ideas to address the problem set that we were working on. And when that came to mind as I'm writing my book, right? Because I'm writing my book and I'm like, okay, here's a problem set. I'm just going to just put it all out there. And then I was like, why can't I do this at work? And so then you have to understand what your corporate boundaries are.
Okay.
So understand your corporate boundaries, right? Right? Because we all have a code of conduct handbook issued to us by our company or our government agency. And so we know what's appropriate and what's not based on that. And so take your crazy ideas that you develop maybe at home and bring them within those boundaries. And then write out what those ideas are and bring them into work and discuss them when you're talking about the problem set that you're addressing in the workplace.
I love that. And I especially want to take you back to something you just said a moment ago that sent all of my alert signals going off like wonk, 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 when you said safety and safe zone. Because, you know, as artists, you know, we talk often on these podcasts about that level of vulnerability that we have to overcome when it's time to share our work or even to approach the blank page or the blank canvas or any of that. So taking our creativity into the workforce requires us once again to you know, we're feeling that vulnerable state. So if we're a manager, let's say that we're a manager of a section, what might we do to ensure that our employees feel that it's safe to share their creative, crazy, but legal ideas?
Well, I would, to me, there are two things. The first thing is to understand that creativity is really about perspective. And it's a different perspective, and we call it creative, and it's essential, I think, to human nature. But it is a perspective, and we come at a problem. Creative people come at a problem from a completely different direction, which is why they're called creative, out there, crazy idea. And if you know that you're different in that way, because typically we are, particularly in a corporate setting, it does make you a little anxious about, do I really want to share? So the manager has to understand that it comes from a different perspective, but it is about perspective. Mm-hmm. And then they have to set the conditions or the environment, just like any other leader. You have to set the atmosphere to allow for it and to support that person. So if you have somebody who's really creative and they come up with a different perspective routinely in team meetings, don't look at them like they're nuts. Oh, that would never work. Don't get on the bandwagon with everybody else snickering at them. Just say, tell me more. You know what? That's a different perspective. Tell me more. And that sets the tone to the team that this is a safe place to bring these ideas or these solutions that come from a different place that we haven't thought about. But it sets the environment to make people realize that I can do that too. Because I guarantee you, there's more than one creative person sitting in that room.
Right.
I guarantee you. And so they're feeling the same way, right? Like they're afraid to say something. They're feeling vulnerable. So the manager, it's the leader's role to set that safe space. So that's the first thing. We talked about perspective.
And then as coworkers, then, right, you know, we're actually co-creators in that setting, you know, so, you know, it's by setting, if the leader sets those boundaries about, you know, hey, this isn't about laughing or snickering over someone's creative idea. Let's approach it, you know, let's respect that, you know, there's that level of possible solution and what can we do about it? So I think that then it falls upon the coworkers to see themselves as co-creators, right?
Right. Yep. And I know co-creation is a big topic for you.
It is.
Um, but it is, that's because then it becomes a team effort. So understand the other thing that people don't understand too, which is really important, especially for creative people, because creative people tend to be possessive of their work.
Oh, that's true. I hadn't thought about that. Ooh.
Yeah, we tend to be possessive of our work for good reason, right? But as soon as you bring it into the workplace, it belongs to your employer. The project now belongs to your employer, unless they allow you to take a patent out on it, but it's still, they're going to be on the patent too.
Right.
So share with your teammates, and then maybe as you go in, you can say, here's my idea, but it's going to require somebody who's really good at Excel spreadsheets. And I think Tom is really good at that. And Mary is really good at PowerPoint. So maybe Mary can help build the brief to the executive, and Tom can help build the spreadsheet with the data that we need. I once had a colleague who was brilliant and creative, another writer like myself, but she didn't want to share her ideas. She was afraid her ideas would be stolen by another colleague and they would get credit for it. And when she expressed these concerns to me, I kept telling her, I was like, but if you're working for the bank or the trucking company or the oil and gas company, and your ideas are put down into an activity, they belong to your employer. You sign a contract with your employer. So if you're afraid of them getting stolen, then all you have to do really is be able to figure out how to get with your manager and your teammates so that they understand where the idea came from. But creative people, again, they become too possessive.
Right.
And when they become overly possessive, they don't want to share their ideas, to the detriment of their employment, because she was let go because she was considered to be a difficult employee because she wouldn't share her ideas. And so they couldn't get the work out there, the ideas out there to build on to address the problems.
Wow. Well, we can be our own worst enemies at times.
We can be. And I literally was like in the stands watching this, and I'm like, what are you doing? Don't do that. You're undermining your own employment. Well, I don't care. It's my idea, and I'm not going to share it unless I get full credit. And I'm like, well, then go talk to your boss about your idea one-on-one. If he likes it, he'll know where it came from, and then you can expand it out to the team.
Exactly.
And I'm not sure. So maybe there was a manager safety issue there. But I don't think so, because I knew her manager, and he was really always asking for, go wild with your ideas and let's bring it back to the team. And he was always, from what I observed, very good about giving credit where credit was due to his team, because he knew that he couldn't be successful without his team. It was unfortunate.
It is unfortunate.
Typically, a creative person, unless you're in a team environment, for creativity like dancing, but most creative activities are isolated. You're isolated. Writers have to shut the door in order to write. Painters typically have to do the same. Sculptors go off to their studio with the painter on opposite ends of the studio, probably with a curtain in between them, in order not to be distracted. So while that's important when you're in your personal creative space, in your workplace, you have to kind of learn how to share.
As you were just describing that and talking about sharing, I suddenly had this image of how different it is when you're creating a film. So, when you're creating a film, a screenwriter knows that there's going to be a great deal of collaboration on that screenplay before it ever, gets into a production mode. And the screenwriter understands that script's going to be changed dozens and dozens of times, even right up to the moment. Then you have the lighting people involved. You have, everybody involved, and everybody sharing their piece of it. And it isn't like anyone's trying to grab more than another. It's a real collaboration when you're creating, whether it's a television show or a film. And so if you think about that from the standpoint of the workplace, then no one feels, as if this is the property of, John Smith, and, so I own all the rights to this. Would you agree?
Well, let's dissect that a little bit,
Okay.
because I think you're definitely onto something, and I like the direction you're going in. Why is it that on a film set, which is a workplace, typically funded by a large corporation, why is it those folks feel like they can be more creative, to include the lighting person or the sound person, which is a very technical skill, than, let's say, the writer or the painter who works in the finance industry?
Exactly.
So again, it comes to perspective, but it also comes to personal boundaries. But I don't want to put a lot of the responsibility on the creative individual. Okay, I think that, when you look at a film crew, they can wear whatever they want, their hair, their tattoos, their piercings, their facial hair. There aren't these boundaries of you have to look this way. They can look any way they want.
Mm-hmm.
They can be creative in their appearance. And I think that acceptance about your appearance also lends to the safe place. But since I've left the Marine Corps, I've worked in some pretty conservative industries, the oil and gas industry, the trucking industry, now the finance industry. And there is definitely a uniform and a particular look that these folks, that the corporation culture drives. But frankly, I think you have to look past that, because I think subliminally that makes people feel uncomfortable, creative people feel uncomfortable. But I think you look past that. And I remember, Friday is dress down day at my corporate job.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember this one woman, and I was like, oh my God. So I am not a fashion person at all. I was in uniform, for 35 years of my life. And this woman comes in one day wearing these broad striped, colorful socks, these like Sam Brown shoes. Do you remember those, the saddle shoes?
Yes.
These denim like overalls, but they were like shorts, because I get her leggings went all the way up. You know what I'm saying? Past her excuse me. And this crazy scarf. And I'm looking at her, and I was like, wow. And she's like, hey, dress down Friday, right? Like, this tells me I can dress any way I want. And I was like, by God, you're right. That was creative.
Yeah.
And it also, but what it did is, because she was a pretty high up manager executive, and I was like, you know what? She's approachable.
Yes, exactly.
So on Monday through Thursday, she's wearing her pantsuit and her pearls, and her hair is coiffed. But on Friday, she didn't even put on cosmetics.
So did you notice that you and others approached her without as much caution Monday through Thursday, because you saw another side of her on Friday?
Yes.
Ah, love it.
Yes. Because she was new to the team until she did. And then when she did that, everybody learned who she was.
I love it.
Yeah, it was great. And so, but what did she do? She shifted a perspective.
Yes.
By being creative.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are you observing out there in the corporate world now? Because I've been out of the corporate world for a while. So what are you observing? Are people withdrawing more, or are people just eager to step out of the box in their way of thinking? Or are they withdrawing out of fear? Fear of losing their jobs, fear of being shamed by an idea or something along those lines.
Unfortunately, it depends on the manager.
Okay.
Or the executive. I've been in teams where, like when I worked in oil and gas, which again is a fairly conservative industry, but I had a supervisor who was backed up by an executive who was like, hey, we need all the great ideas we can get on how to develop this asset, how to manage this asset, how to make money out of this asset. So kind of like the colonel in the Marine Corps, they were like, just, even if it's illegal, let's talk about it. Let's at least put it out there, right? Bring your whole self into this crazy conversation. And so they set that safe environment.
Okay.
And then when I worked in some other industries under other managers, so it goes back to what should managers know. Wow, like, I didn't even want to say anything that was even conservative. Forget putting out there a creative idea that was going to violate the mantra of, but we've always done it this way.
Right.
That wasn't going to happen. And then there's the ones who are kind of in between. And the ones who are in between, after you develop some trust with them, then you can slowly bring them over to the ideas that feel like they're far afield of what the corporate tolerance has. But I think that those managers have more potential than the ones that shut everybody down. And everybody knows who those people are.
Mm-hmm.
And I would, not that this is a workplace podcast, it's a creative podcast, but if you do feel like you get shut down with a manager, then leave.
Mm-hmm.
Right? People leave managers, they don't leave jobs, basically.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's
That is so true.
But I think that in the corporate structure, so the atmosphere is that the competitive edge, depending on the industry, can be really tight. So they do want those creative ideas, but you have to understand what the boundaries are and what the risk tolerance is to bring them in. Not only the personal risk tolerance, but the corporate risk tolerance. So that you have to know. So basically, you have to know your company. You have to know your role and your team's role. You have to know. You have to be keenly aware, if not knowledgeable, of at least 2 levels up from you to understand how much traction your ideas are going to get. Because it can be pretty rejection. Creative people don't take rejection very well. And so when your ideas keep getting shot down because your manager might like it, but the executive may not, well, so help your manager sell it to the executive.
Yeah, I was about to ask that question. We can become so intense about our ideas and creativity and so certain that we're correct about everything that when it's shot down, we take it very personally. And when you're in a work environment like that, you have to kind of go with some of that. You have to kind of develop that skin and get beyond it or adjust and find the other angle that creates that better pitch, as you were just talking about, right?
Right. And the best question to ask is, okay, what works about this idea and what doesn't?
Perfect. God, yeah, I think you're right. I think that's spot on, Meredith. Yeah.
Yeah, because we'll get rid of what doesn't work, and let's explore a little more about what does work and what complements that so that we can grow it. And that takes a little more creativity when you think about it. And
so here you are, this novelist, and I've read your work. Whoa, it's amazing, everybody. And be sure that you check out the links that will be on this podcast description to Meredith's work for A Cajun Journey. Everybody wants to read that. It's phenomenal. So here you are, this novelist, and you said that you were bringing timelines and those sort of creative tips into your job. Can you give us an example of how something worked?
Right. So right now, the role that I'm in is around risk monitoring, risk mitigation.
Okay.
And one of the risks is offshoring. Like when we, it doesn't have to be offshoring from the United States, but whenever you hire a vendor that is not co-located in the same country where your business resides, there's some risk, especially if you're transferring data, because you don't know what the controls are, the laws are different with that country, so on and so forth. And so when we first had to redesign this process, I was like, oh my God, a process. I'm a novelist. I'm not a process. For the first time, I learned that, oh yeah, there are process engineers. I had no idea. So I was like, all right. So how am I going to, what am I going to do? So the first thing I took to was a mind map. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that technique.
Somewhat, but please tell our listeners.
So you write the central theme down in a bubble in the center of the page. And for this one, it was offshoring. And then think of a wheel with spokes. And then each spoke carries a central theme off of the primary theme. Or maybe I should say a primary theme off of the central theme.
Okay.
And then, so you have offshoring. And then you draw a spoke for laws, rules, regulations. And then you draw an arm off of that spoke that is related to laws, rules, regulations, right? Like something like government conditions or government atmosphere, because some governments are easier to work with than others, depending on the industry. And then you can write another spoke off of that offshoring about, like, let's say data controls. because when you start moving data across jurisdictional borders, not only do you have the law regulation, but you have data controls. So, and then you do your arms. And so next thing you know, you have in the center your primary theme or your central theme, and then you have these spokes with these secondary themes coming off of them, and then they all have arms, right? And so
Right.
and then you take one of those arms and you try to prioritize them, and you take one and you're like, okay, let me work this out. Let me either write about it, which I would do in a novel, or build a PowerPoint around it. Let me understand where the gaps are, because it begins to reveal where the gaps are, where you have to do some research to fill the gap. Or maybe you need data, so let me start building a spreadsheet to support, to include the data that supports this case. But it helps you to really pull together the case, the business case now, right?
Right.
That you can take to your manager, and you're thinking 2 levels up to the executive. What does the executive want to see? And then your manager will help you to put in what the executive wants to see in either the PowerPoint, which is typical in corporate America, or the Word document. So and you don't see mind maps in corporate America. I've never seen a mind map in corporate America.
Really? Seriously?
Seriously, and not unless I'm the one who wrote it.
Wow.
But they come out, that's, I made a mistake once of showing my manager the mind map, and they were like, what is that? And I'm like, don't worry, I'll make it digestible for you. And I did, right? But the creative side of me had to have the mind map before I could really pull the thread, if you will, on the problem we were trying to solve.
Wow.
Timelines are the same way.
Exactly.
It's a similar technique that that we used when we were planning, doing activity plans or strategic planning. But it's also can be used. I use it when I have a character, and I'm like, okay, when was my character born? When did he get married? When did he go off to war? When was his son born? That kind of thing. But they're also useful when you're working out these projects, because every executive wants to know, how much time is it going to take? What's it going to cost? How much time is it going to take?
Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, just like with your characters, having to know the backstory, and before you can even really know how you're going to justify some of their actions and decisions, you probably have to know some of the historical data on some of these other arms and spokes and everything else. So, there's some of that you're going to have to use for justification there.
Oh, and you know what? And you said the word story, and it was brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
I was putting together, I was struggling when I first came along with the idea that, okay, when I first started writing together a business case, and my manager was like, well, you just have to let the story hang together. And I was like, oh, you said story. Oh, now I can tell a story.
I love it.
And I even said, can I throw some dialogue in there? And he was like, no dialogue. You can have the story, no dialogue. I did throw a little dialogue in there. He chuckled, but he took it out. He gave me that safe space, right, where I knew I could put a little dialogue in there, and he took it out, and that was fine. But that's the other thing. Like, for people who, painters have the same thing, right? The whole context. They're telling a story through their painting. Dancers are telling a story through their movements. When you're putting something together for an executive in corporate America, they want to know the story.
Absolutely. Everybody wants a story.
Everybody wants a
story.
So
true, Meredith, because that's what really hooks us, is what is the story about this? I mean, when we watch the Olympics, we're just as much intrigued by watching the athletes' stories, where they came from and the struggles they got over, as we are their accomplishments during the Olympics. First, we want to get hooked with the story, right?
That's right. And it's funny you should say that. My son's 14. He's about to finish his 9th grade year. We're talking to him about college. And even the application process, they want you to write an essay that tells a story.
There we go.
So it starts young. Don't forget, it's a lesson I think we all have, right? We all got read, well, maybe not all of us, but most of us were read stories when we were younger. And those stories carry through into corporate America.
Well, I mean, at our core, we're all, I think, storytellers. I mean, whether we do it professionally or not, I mean, we can all come up with a story just on how we got to work that day. Everything that happened just getting there. And we walk in and we're telling our coworkers the story of how we got there that day. We're all storytellers.
You're right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, oh, Today was so easy. You can tell it's spring break week, or, oh my God, there was some idiot on the interstate who doesn't know how to drive. Let me tell you the drama I experienced this morning. So
But
you're
then
right.
I, but
You're
then
right.
but then I think what happens is we somehow at some point feel like, okay, now it's time to shut that wall off and put my headphones on and get into my cubicle. And so then all of a sudden we forget who we really are at our core
Right, right.
and to bring that into that job. Yeah.
I used to sit in a cube, and then they came up with these modern floors, which are an open concept floor. And when you walk in, you select a desk. Nobody has a desk. You have a locker assigned, but you don't have a desk. It's great for collaboration. I mean, I've met people in this environment that I would never have met before. So I'm really grateful to that. But unfortunately, some people still do it, but most of us kind of have left our pictures at home. But when I was in a cube, believe it or not, I'm down at a sandwich shop, a national chain sandwich shop, to buy lunch. And I had this idea strike me, and I was like, "Oh, I gotta write that down before I forget." And foolishly didn't bring my notebook, but they had one of those cookie sleeves with their name on it. So I was like, "I don't want a cookie, but can I have one of those cookie sleeves?" And she was like, "Sure." And I took the pen and I wrote the idea down, and then I pinned it in my cubicle. And then over time, I began to write more just single words on that cubicle, or on that sleeve, in order to be inspired to remember to be creative. So that when you go
Oh,
into the cubicle, while we have pictures and we have little toys and little stress balls, I think anything that we can bring in that will remind us to be creative is critical.
I agree. All right. So to wrap up this episode, which I don't want to do because I'm having so much fun. If we're managers, it's important to create the safety zone, right?
That's the key responsibility of every manager. The safety zone, we talk about safe zones to make sure people aren't bullied at work. We talk about safe zones for people to be included if they come from a different racial or ethnic background, or faith, or sexual orientation. So why can't we extend that to people who are creative?
Ah, love. And then as fellow workers, co-workers, then what?
Same with
We also want to honor the safe space.
right. And I remember once telling a colleague who was always he was very much a but we've always done it this way kind of guy. And I was expressing an idea once, and he comes out with, but we've always done it this way. And I was like, just love the idea for 5 minutes.
Oh,
Give
that's
me
good.
that. But for 5 minutes, we're going to talk about everything that's good about this idea. And it, it worked, right? I mean, he still came back to, but we've always done it this way. But it did kind of open his own mind. And so I think if you're a coworker, love every idea for 5 minutes before you start ripping
Wow.
it apart.
Oh, I hope everybody got that. Oh my gosh. There's a certain organization that I volunteer with, and I'm going to use that tonight, as a matter of fact. And that word that you used is something that we also have to be mindful of, whether we're a coworker or the manager. And it's the word but. Yeah, but. Yeah, but.
Hmm.
We can get into such a habit of doing that, and like you said, immediately finding the flaws because of it's outside the norm of what's been routine. But that whole love it for 5 minutes, I mean, just feel it, love it, imagine it's real, and then we'll talk about it after
Right.
5 minutes.
That's right.
Wow.
You'll be surprised how many people become converts on an idea after they've loved it for 5 minutes.
You might have just changed the entire world.
Oh, that would be great. Doubtful, but that would be wonderful.
Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful?
And here's another tip for people. And I can't remember where I picked this up, but it kind of goes with the whole of the idea for 5 minutes. The word "but" is no longer part of our vocabulary for the next 5 minutes. You can use "and."
Perfect.
You can't use "but."
Perfect. I love that. Well, I think you've pretty much already answered this final question I have for you, but I'm going to throw it out there just in case there's another thought or so that you want to add. What does living your most creative life look like for you, Meredith?
Today, it looks like working on my novels in the mornings, in the evenings, and the weekends, and bringing creative ideas to address problem sets into my corporate job. Because while my life isn't ideal in that it's not where I want to be, I'm really grateful for the corporate opportunity that I have so I can support my family.
Oh, love that. And I guess I do have one other thing that maybe we haven't touched on, and that is when you're there in your corporate job and you see fellow coworkers sharing ideas and becoming creative, what does that feel like? What is the atmosphere like in that room?
Well, I get excited. I mean, I really, and I'm like, oh, and we can do this, and how about that, and let's look at it from this perspective. And did you think of that? Oh, I'll take the notes. Everybody start talking. I'll take the notes. And when the energy, when that person has at least one other person who gets excited about the idea, the energy goes up in the room. And unless you're a zombie, you tend to pick up energy and start getting excited too. I mean, even the people who were the Debbie Downers or the Nathan Knows, even they either get involved in a positive way or they just sit in the corner. They sit in the corner, but now they're not throwing arrows at you.
Right. Well, the word I was looking for, which you basically described, is joy. There's a level of joy, that energy when people are collaborating with one another and they're not being, the victim of arrows that are being thrown. You can't help but raise the entire vibration and energy of that room, and everybody feels a little stoked by joy. When you say,
oh yeah, well, co-creating, I mean that can be a joyful experience. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. Well, Meredith, thank you so much. Oh my God, I think you just changed the whole world with just love it for 5 minutes.
Love it for 5 minutes. No, I appreciate this opportunity, Tracy. I really do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's co-creative listening experience. Please remember to leave a comment about the single greatest takeaway for you today. That one thing you will remember from this day forward. Was it something funny or provocative? Was it just what you needed to hear? Please share so we can all benefit. And remember to return Tuesdays and Thursdays to accept your gifts, the 22-minute podcast for inspiring your most creative life.